According to Forbes, billionaire net worth has nearly doubled in the last 4 years, all while layoffs are at their highest level in over a decade. And with US debt now projected to increase by 55% within the next decade, billionaires, for the first time in American history, are now paying a lower effective tax rate than the average American. Raising the question, when did selling out the working class become the nation's business plan? To set the tone for this discussion, this is a recent exchange between billionaire investor Peter Thiel and the New York Times.
You would prefer the human race to endure, right? You're hesitating.
Yeah, well,
yes?
I don't know. I would
This is a long hesitation. This is a long hesitation.
There's so many questions implicit
in
this.
Should the human race survive?
Yes.
Okay.
And since this now seems to be such a difficult question to answer, let's reflect on how this exact mindset, one that sees human life as expendable and the endless pursuit of profit and global control, has played out throughout modern history, with one of the clearest examples emerging from the unprecedented wealth disparity of the Gilded Age, where business leaders insisted that the demands of the modern economy could never be met while adhering to the irrational expectations being pushed by newly formed labor unions, reframing calls to end low pay, harsh working conditions, and child labor not as moral imperatives, but as dangerous communistic propaganda threatening economic progress. And no one exemplified that manipulation more than Jay Gould, one of the most powerful railroad executives in American history, who amassed a net worth of over $70 billion today. Where in 1886, after Gould betrayed a labor agreement and fired a worker for organizing, the Knights of Labor, then the largest labor organization in the country with over 700,000 members, launched the first coordinated multi-state strike across Gould's entire Southwestern Railroad empire, demanding not only that the fired worker be reinstated, but also fairer wages, safer conditions, and an end to discriminatory hiring practices. But rather than negotiate, Gould hired thousands of strikebreakers, commonly referred to as scabs, the Pinkerton Detective Agency, a private security force notorious for provoking violent clashes with labor unions, and leveraged his political ties to deploy state militia to forcibly reopen his blockaded stations. And after weeks of violence and economic disruption, Gould and the Knights of Labor finally reached an agreement, and union members were ordered back to work. However, before the ink had even dried, Gould reversed course, firing and blacklisting every union member across the system, causing the Knights of Labor to lose all credibility as their membership plummeted by over 60% in less than 2 years. And while the remaining workforce, now stripped of any protection, returned to longer hours, lower wages, and harsher conditions, Gould was asked how he managed to suppress such a massive uprising. His response? I can hire one half of the working class to kill the other half, establishing a blueprint to divide workers, manipulate the system, weaponize authority, and the illusion of choice to keep the masses turning the gears of an economy built for someone else. Andrew Carnegie, the steel tycoon who amassed a net worth of roughly $310 billion today, despite publicly advocating for labor unions and claiming the wealthy had a moral obligation to serve the greater good, in 1892, Carnegie followed this very same blueprint as he instructed Henry Frick, chairman of Carnegie Steel, to slash wages and discourage union power by whatever means necessary, where Frick constructed Fort Frick, a 12-foot-high, 3-mile-long fence lined with barbed wire, water cannons, and sniper-filled watchtowers just to lock out the striking workers, while simultaneously hiring incoming replacement workers and agents from the Pinkerton Detective Agency. And while the Pinkertons attempted to breach the strikers' blockade, gunfire erupted, triggering one of the bloodiest labor disputes in American history, where after days of violence, Frick called the Pennsylvania National Guard, deploying 8,000 state militia troops to restore order and reopen the mill under armed protection. And while Carnegie publicly stated, "This is the trial of my life," death's hand accepted, such a foolish step. Contrary to my ideals, repugnant to every feeling of my nature, the works are not worth one drop of human blood. He discreetly cabled Frick, "Life is worth living again. First happy morning since July." And with the strike crushed and the union blacklisted from the steel industry entirely, Carnegie slashed wages, imposed grueling 12-hour shifts, and eliminated 500 jobs outright. And while these are just two examples of the countless labor strikes that ended in chaos, Gould's blueprint worked exactly as intended, turning the working class against one another, as the majority of violence came not from the top, but from the workers struggling to agree on what they were even fighting for, where this division was especially clear in the debate over child labor, as children contributed roughly 30% of household income for native-born families, and over 40% for Irish and German households, causing the majority of Americans to actually fight against union efforts for reform, where even amid an endless list of tragedies, like Carmela Tioli, a 13-year-old girl forced to leave school after a recruiter paid her father $4 to forge a birth certificate to exaggerate her age, who spent the next 7 months in a hospital after her hair was caught in a cotton twisting machine. Nearly every reform bill was vilified. The chairman of the National Association of Manufacturers even dismissed these efforts as a labor union plot against the advancement and happiness of the American boy, calling it a threat to industrial prosperity. One critic even claimed, "It is a tragic thing to contemplate if the federal government closes the doors of the factories and you send that little child back, empty-handed, that brave little boy that was looking forward to get money for his mother for something to eat." And even as the Gilded Age eventually transformed into the Progressive Era, which laid the groundwork for future labor reforms by establishing workplace safety laws, compensation for injured workers, restrictions on child labor, and early momentum for women's rights, it also marked a shift in how Gould's blueprint would be preserved, where John D. Rockefeller, who at his peak controlled nearly 2% of the nation's total wealth, and whose net worth today is estimated between $400 and $630 billion, established the General Education Board in 1902, laying the foundation for a modern education system to meet the growing demand for a disciplined and compliant workforce, where his advisor and co-founder Frederick Taylor Gates expressed the mission plainly. "In our dream, we have limitless resources, and the people yield themselves with perfect docility to our molding hand. The present educational conventions fade from our minds, and, unhampered by tradition, we work our own goodwill upon a grateful and responsive rural folk. We shall not try to make these people or any of their children into philosophers or men of learning or men of science. We are not to raise up from among them authors, orators, poets, or men of letters. We shall not search for embryo, great artists, painters, musicians, nor will we cherish even the humbler ambition to raise up from among them lawyers, doctors, preachers, politicians, statesmen, of whom we now have ample supply. For the task we set before ourselves is a very simple as well as a very beautiful one, to train these people as we find them for a perfectly ideal life, just where they are." However, this ideological framework remained largely ineffective, as most families were still fundamentally dependent on their children's income, where it wasn't until the Great Depression, with a youth unemployment rate reaching as high as 60% in many urban areas, that kids were finally pushed out of the factories, but into the classroom, as education was now seen as a cheaper alternative to childcare, resulting in a 20% increase in high school graduates by the end of the Great Depression. And while World War II ultimately unified the nation, forcing both government and industry to recognize the importance of the working class, the very people protecting the country while also expanding its industrial base, the post-war economic expansion introduced a new ideology, one that prioritized the long-term value in not just a workforce that could afford the very products they were building, but one with the time and stability to enjoy them. And while this golden age of capitalism is often romanticized by the ability to meet consumer demand off the wages of a factory worker, it is crucial that we understand that the strength of the working class did not come from the factory job itself. In most cases, workers actually hated those jobs. It came from the simple fact that government and industry were fulfilling their responsibilities. Through the GI Bill, over 8 million returning veterans received tuition-free college education, vocational training, and low-interest government-backed mortgages, fueling national ownership from 44% in 1940 to nearly 62% by 1960. Corporate tax rates were also more than twice what they are today, while companies still actively reinvested in their workforce. Top marginal tax rates climbed as high as 94%, and while few paid the full rate, the effective tax burden on the wealthy was still more than double what it is today. And union membership surged to nearly 35% of the entire workforce, ensuring these gains weren't just temporary boosts, but structural benefits shared across the working class. Where taken together, it wasn't the 50-cent hamburgers, the firm handshake, or the manufacturing job that made this period so memorable. It was the fact that for the first time in human history, the average worker had genuine leverage. A system where rising productivity actually meant rising wages, where the value of the dollar reflected the value of labor, and a social contract that prioritized economic stability over shareholder profit, allowing the people doing the work to actually have something to show for it. Enough, in fact, to push 61% of Americans into the middle class. However, as the post-war economic expansion began to stagnate, dragged down by a nation that had gorged itself on endless wars, rather than accepting responsibility, Political and corporate leaders shifted the blame onto the working man's so-called extravagant wage demands, casting organized labor as the driving force behind inflation, resulting in a growing societal stigma that has reduced union membership to just 10% today. And with nearly 80% of the 2.5 million enlisted men who served during Vietnam coming from poor or working-class families who couldn't afford college deferment, the divide between the nation's labor force was only deepened, as higher education became seen as a societal marker for privilege and exemption, where the mind shaped by Gould's and Rockefeller's blueprint finally matured, giving rise to a generation of neoliberal leaders like Milton Friedman, Margaret Thatcher, and of course, Ronald Reagan, where the 1980s and 90s brought sweeping policy change, repealing the Fairness Doctrine, which once required news networks to present balanced coverage, fueling the rise of partisan talk radio and 24-hour cable news, where corporations were now free to acquire multiple local stations across markets, concentrating media power into the hands of just a few major players, shaping a public perception that, unlike the Gilded Age, when billionaires were vilified as greedy robber barons, American society began worshiping them, mistaking their ability to accumulate wealth as proof of brilliance, and treating their success not just as admirable, but as essential, where early tech billionaires like Bill Gates were praised for their philanthropy, and Steve Jobs was immortalized as a visionary genius, despite both men overseeing workforces defined by burnout, exploitation, and mass layoffs.
Transmitted by mosquitoes. I brought some here so you could experience this. We'll let those roam around the auditorium a little bit. There. There's no reason only poor people should have the experience.
And while Jeff Bezos' $50 million wedding dominated headlines, barely a word was mentioned about Amazon being found guilty of manipulating workplace injury data, falsely portraying its warehouses as safer than they actually were, as nearly every major media outlet now operates as a glorified PR firm for the billionaire class, spoon-feeding the public a carefully staged narrative designed to pacify and mislead. This period also removed SEC restrictions on corporate stock buybacks, legalizing what had previously been considered market manipulation, by allowing companies to funnel profits into inflating their own stock prices, or following Clinton's trade agreements, which outsourced roughly 3 million American jobs, corporate buybacks more than doubled, while stock option programs increased by over 40%, effectively giving top-level executives the power to personally profit off the artificial growth of their own shares. One of the clearest examples was Jeff Bezos, who, despite being one of the richest men on earth, claimed an $80,000 annual salary for decades as Amazon CEO, publicly insisting he just didn't feel right for taking more, while privately using that structure to pay $0 in federal income tax in 2007, despite his net worth increasing by nearly $4 billion that year alone, and again in 2011, when his net worth rose by another $6 billion.
What's with the Honda? This is a perfectly good car.
Or between 2014 and 2018, his true tax rate was just 0.98%. Warren Buffett paid even less at 0.1%. And yet today, stock buybacks just set another all-time annual record of $942.5 billion, while companies slashed employee training budgets to just $98 billion, where since 1978, CEO stock-based compensation has skyrocketed 1,460%, while hourly pay for American workers has grown by just 17.5%, a gap so wide, 77% of the country can no longer afford the median home price of $495,750. And with that collapse in purchasing power, institutional investors are now projected to own over 7.6 million homes, or more than 40% of all single-family rentals by 2030, with a report from Redfin stating that America's top 1% is now so wealthy they could practically purchase 99% of all homes in the entire country without even going into debt. And while Thiel is still trying to decide if humanity should endure, the final stages of Gould's blueprint are coming to fruition, as the wealthiest people in modern history have taken it upon themselves to engineer an economy designed to fundamentally remove the working class, where modern society is continuing to head straight towards a cliff while we actively remove any guardrails designed to prevent our destruction. At some point, we have to recognize that the systems in place are supposed to serve us. We are not supposed to be serving them. And if you are working at a job, if you're lucky enough to get a job, if you're working at a job and you are not able to make ends meet, while an individual is having a $50 million wedding, there's something to be said about that, and it shouldn't just be brushed under the rug. And I'm going to tell you here that if we just keep removing more and more of these safety nets, that isn't going to help you. The money is not going to be trickled down into your pockets because it never has, ever. And I say this because I care, because what I am finding is that the greatest time in American history, yes, it came from economic expansion, but it really came from shared responsibility. Responsibility is the key word. Individuals felt responsible for what it was that they were doing. Business leaders felt responsible for their workers. The government felt responsible for the nation. And with that, workers felt responsible for the country, and they felt responsible for their employer. And so you actually have a progressive movement. You have individuals moving in a collective direction. And yes, there were still immense difficulties. It was not perfect, but at least people could somewhat come together. I'm amazed by the fact of how divided we are. And we could argue about how divided we are. And then we could argue about if the division is worse than previous division. It isn't working. I make a video. I spend 40, 50, 60, 70 hours a week researching, doing the best I can to understand a topic, to be able to condense it to 4 to 5 pages, to be able to give you the most value in the least amount of time. And I make a video about minimum wage, about why ultimately I don't discuss if we should raise it or if we should lower it. I mention the simple fact that we are all not being paid enough. What is the comment section? It's arguments on if we should raise it or if we should lower it. I then make a video about why we desperately need blue-collar workers and how they will be the future. The comments isn't, yeah, I agree. What can we do to fix this? It is not only blue-collar workers fighting against white-collar workers, it's blue-collar workers fighting on how much they're needed or how little they're needed amongst blue-collar workers. I then make a video about addressing baby boomers and how they also lived a very challenging life. We look at it in terms of economic expansion. The reality is that while you're experiencing economic expansion, you don't realize you're experiencing it. There were still immense difficulties. The Cold War, the Vietnam War, the Civil Rights Movement, that was all very challenging. And so we have to understand that. The comment section is flooded with, I can't wait until baby boomers don't exist, or baby boomers saying this young generation doesn't get it. They don't know what hard work was, or they don't know what we had to experience, despite me taking an entire video to explain it. And this isn't me being frustrated at the comment section or whining or any of these things. This is an individual that is concerned and that I truly care. And I feel responsible. I have done so much for this channel because I care about people. I genuinely want to see things get better. Since I was a little boy, all I wanted to do was remove individuals' suffering, ease it in any way that I possibly could. And so I've spent my entire life getting to the point where I have the ability to do that. And so I squeeze every single drop that I have within myself every single week to be able to do this. Because at this current stage in my life, this is the best thing that I can do. And so I feel responsible. I spend the time going through dozens and dozens and dozens of articles, and I start to recognize that, oh, this journalist seems to be quite biased, so now I don't listen to him, even though the stats that he does would support the argument that I'm trying to make. Or how much money I have declined in sponsorships. I have declined more in the past 6 months than I've ever made in a single year working a 9-to-5 job. And I do that because I care about you. I don't want you to be pushed a product that I don't believe in and that I would never want you to use. And so I am here because I believe it is important to adhere to your moral standards, to be able to be responsible for what it is that you care about. And there's part of me that just believes that to become a billionaire, you have to sell off a large portion of that. When I look at an individual like Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, Bill Gates, I don't see a person that I want to aspire to be like. I see a shell of an individual that had to sell his soul to be able to get that. And I think it's disgusting. And there isn't an aspect of me that cares about what it is that they have to say. And I am much more interested to go speak with what is the garbage man? What is his life like? Or what is the post officer like? Or what is the Amazon factory worker like? Because those are the people that make a difference, and we have forgotten that. While it's funny to make, it's scary, funny, absurd to look at what Peter Thiel's saying, not being able to answer, is humanity going to endure? I'm talking to individuals and I say, aren't you concerned about the future that we're headed? And I can't find a person that doesn't say, well, as long as I do okay, or as long as I find success, or I'm glad I started now. Nobody cares. Nobody cares anymore. Nobody cares about the working class. Nobody cares about you. Hopefully your family does, but I'm talking about the systems that are in place that are supposed to be serving you. At some point, we have to realize that we're not in service to them. We are not in service to our politicians. Our politicians are in service to us, and we are on a fast track to destruction. And unless we can somehow pull it together, which will be us, if we can pull it together, if we can begin to listen more than we just speak, we can make a difference. I don't know. I don't know if this is a conclusion for billionaires. I don't know. You have $1 trillion. I don't care. I just care that individuals are able to be able to enjoy their lives somewhat. And what I'm seeing is just disgusting. How we're going to just create AI and we have no sort of policies or safety nets or anything like that. It's disgusting. And at some point we have to call that out. The modern society we're living in is disgusting. And while there are, yes, medicine and other aspects like that are getting better, for the most part, it is a disgusting way that we have just abandoned each other. I just think more people hate other humans than any other aspect about life. And that is a shame. Because at the end of the day, that means that we are no better than the billionaires that honestly don't give a crap about us. So I don't know. I'm doing the best that I can. And I know that many of you are as well. So I'm sorry if you felt like my frustration was coming out onto you. But at the end of the day, I'm just passionate and trying to do the best I can. So until next time, bye-bye.
Is it true that you can leap over a chair from a standing position?
It depends on the size of the chair. I'll cheat a little bit.
Yeah!